now we get to wrap up. Fallacies, pitfalls, perspectives, sort of a, now we've spent some time sort of looking at the machinery, lines of code, and I think a thing about this class that works well is we make you go frequently between looking at details and lines of code and then also trying to back up a little bit and look at the big picture. So let me just start with a couple of pitfalls. Fat controllers and fat views. And when I say fat controllers, I'm not talking about human beings in a particular occupation. I'm talking about controllers whose methods start getting really, really long. Now, in the simple example that I showed, the controller method was like 4 lines. In practice, they'll be a little longer than that, but they shouldn't be a lot longer. And the reason that it gets that way is because when you start thinking about, I want to code the following new action in my app, well, what's the first place in your app that's a point of contact with the user? It's the controller, right? That's how Model View Controller works. So the first code you write that can touch what the user is doing is code that goes into the controller. And because that's where you start coding, inevitably, that's where you keep coding. And you think, oh, it's just one more thing. Oh, just a couple more lines. And pretty soon you've got like a page-long controller method. And you realize that the controller is doing work that really belongs somewhere else, usually in the model. If it is interesting work, the model should do it. So it's a huge temptation that you should avoid to start just throwing code into your controller methods, because that's the first place you happen to look when you're writing new app code. Fat views is a similar problem. And Hamel does some social engineering to try to make it really awkward to put code into your views. But people manage to circumvent it nonetheless. And it starts innocently enough. It's like, well, I have a collection of items, so I just need a simple for loop to loop over the collection and print out like 1 table row per item. OK, well, that's kind of reasonable. Oh, but it's not sorted the way I want, so I'll just add a couple of lines to sort it before I display the table. And oh, well, what if the user's not logged in? Then they shouldn't see some of the choices. And again, you're on this slippery slope to decisions that really ought to be made somewhere else, right? The view is just for presenting stuff. And if you need some code to sort of prettify what the view is trying to present, that's what helpers are for. You can put helper methods in for stuff like that. I mentioned that it's really easy, because of this philosophy that you're really designing a RESTful service first and a user-facing service second, that it's actually quite easy to use the same controller code to match both purposes. And I'm going to show you an example of how to do that. Typically, if you're being called as a service in a service-oriented architecture, the caller will probably expect that you will deliver results to them in XML or JSON. XML we sort of have seen by osmosis. JSON we'll talk about more when we talk about JavaScript further down the line. But basically what I'm going to show you is a trivial controller change lets you repurpose it to either way. And we're going to look at so here's a version of the create action that will work correctly either in a service-oriented architecture or in the human-facing one that we just built. So what did I change here? These first 2 lines are the same. Update attribute. This is all. Now, what's changed here is what we do in the rendering step. And what I've done is I've put the render step inside of this block with this method respond to. Respond to yields to a block something that Ruby calls a collector, or that Rails calls a collector. And basically, a collector is responsible for figuring out what format the client probably wanted and what it should do for that format. So in our example here, we're going to worry about 2 formats. If the client wants HTML, well, that was a user-facing request. That means we have to generate something that is a reasonable HTML page to present to a human being. On the other hand, if the client wants XML, that means that we were called as a service in a service-oriented architecture, and what we need to generate is an XML representation of the result of this operation. And the respond to is baked into Rails. There's logic in the routing subsystem that already allows you to, with 1 line change in your routes file, say, these actions should be valid in service-oriented architecture mode. They should be callable as the client wants an XML version of the same action. So that's how this part works. You don't have to worry about this. This is going to be set up for you. All you have to do is provide a block that says what's the right thing to do in each case. So in the HTML case, this is the same thing we had before. We're just going to do a redirect back to a different action. In the XML case, we're going to render. So render :XML means deliver the output in such a way that the client on the other end will see it as an XML encoded document. And what's the thing that we're going to render? Well, conveniently, Rails defines a default, or I should say active record, defines a default toXML method for you. And the simplest thing it does is, if your model contains basic types like strings and ints as its attributes, it will correctly XMLify that. You're free to override it so that you can do custom fields or whatever you want. But for the most part, this will just work. And if I added a 3rd line here for JSON, it would work the same way. So again, the message here is, what's the controller doing? It's the first point of contact from the outside world. It can figure out what kind of entity is making the request. The model is where the real work happens, but once the work has been done, the controller can also decide what's the most appropriate way to present it. And if you wanted to do like your custom special style sheets for a mobile app or something like that, this is another place that you could add that logic. Completely orthogonal and very cool.